A question to ponder. What is music? Now, this might seem like kind of a no-brainer. Of course we know what music is. How could we not know what music is? But have you ever really tried to define it? Have you ever really tried to explain music to someone who would have no concept of what it is? It's kind of hard to do, isn't it? I mean, really think about it for a second. Really try to find a solid, concise definition of music. It's such a complicated and ubiquitous part of our lives that we don't even really think about what it really is. We just kind of know it when we hear it. So let's see if we can't answer this question in the course of this video. What is music? Alright, let's get real technical here. The most commonly accepted technical definition of music seems to be organized sound. Now, sound on its own has four intrinsic properties: duration, or how long the sound lasts; pitch, or how frequent the vibrations occur, or how high or low the sound is; intensity, or how loud the sound is; and timbre, or what the tone color is, or what the sound sounds like outside of pitch, duration, and intensity. Music, then, is our attempt to organize these sounds, to take these intrinsic properties of sound and hone them into a sound that we find, if not pleasing, then at least desirable, the type of sound that we want. So let's say we were going to graph music. We're going to graph the four intrinsic properties of sound. Let's start with duration, or we could think of it as time. Music is, in a lot of ways, just a measurement of time. So we'll mark it as a horizontal line, like a timeline. And we measure time in music not in seconds and minutes, but in beats. The beat is not only the measurement of the time that you're hearing, it's basically what drives the music forward. It's what you tap your foot to. Now, the way that we organize the duration of sound is very binary. There either is a sound or there isn't. And so the different notes that we have on the page, like the quarter notes, half notes, whole notes, and all that, those are all different durations of sound lasting longer than other sounds. And we organize those different durations into rhythms, and we organize the beats into measures, and the measures into phrases, and all that sort of thing. So that's time. Next, we have pitch, and since pitch is a measurement of how high or low something is, we'll do that with a vertical line. Now, what pitch technically is the frequency of vibrations. The faster something is vibrating, the higher the pitch. But music actually has tuned notes. The difference between a musical sound and just a sound is in the regularity of the vibrations. Something that is just a sound, like me talking or me knocking on the desk or something like that, that has an uneven vibration. There's not really a fixed pattern to it. But a musical tone, like me singing a note or me playing a note, has a more even vibration. There's actually a pattern that you can pick out. So what we have done in our tuning system is we have found a system of notes that we find best to use for music. And our system of notes isn't the same as all of the systems of notes. There are other tuning systems out there other than our 12 chromatic scale. And these pitches are organized into tonalities or modes or keys, and these are organized into scales from which we can get melodies and harmonies and all that good stuff that we really associate with music. This is what you hum in the shower. Next we have intensity. We'll do a three-dimensional graph. We'll do depth for this one. Intensity is pretty straightforward. It's the loudness of the sound, how loud or how soft it is. And notice I said loudness and not volume. I think volume relates more to the last intrinsic property of sound. And the way that we organize this is with dynamics, with our fortes and our pianos, and gradually getting louder and gradually getting softer and all of that. That's pretty straightforward. And then finally, the last one is timbre, or tone color. Unfortunately, we can't really graph that very easily because timbre isn't something that's really measurable. It's not something you can quantify. You can't say that something has a timbre of 5. That doesn't make any sense. You describe tone through the use of subjective adjectives. That tone sounds wispy or brassy or harsh. And so you might think of it in terms of maybe making the graph a different color. Right now it's blue, but maybe we will draw it red over top, and that gives it a different look even though it is still the same graph. Maybe we'll add some green to that as well. And with timbre we make use of the instrumentation. So a flute has a different timbre than a clarinet, has a different timbre than a trombone, has a different timbre than a violin, and even different voices have different timbres. That's how you can tell that it's me talking to you right now and not Charlie Is So Cool Like, or Wheezy Waiter, or my sister. And we not only manipulate timbre with the instrumentation, what instruments are playing when, but also which instruments are playing together, what instruments create a new timbre together, how many instruments are playing, whether we have the whole orchestra playing or just a few instruments, and also how the instruments are being played. It's possible to get a whole bunch of different tone colors out of just one instrument. So, all that seems pretty organized, right? Organized sound, that seems like a pretty good definition of music, but let's see how far we can stretch this. And in order to do this, I need to introduce you to a concept known as aleatory. Aleatory is music by chance. It's the idea of musical elements coming into the piece that were not planned. And if you think about it, every music has aleatoric elements in it because of the human element in music. If you've ever gone to listen to a live performance of the same piece, then you might have noticed that there are very minor differences in the performances. Not huge ones, not ones that you notice unless you're really listening for them, but they're still there. Because different people are playing the piece, different people are working on the piece, and sometimes even the same people are working on the piece, but they do things a little bit differently in another performance atmosphere. So maybe the horn decides to crescendo a little bit faster in this passage. Maybe the trumpet misses a few notes in this passage. Maybe the conductor gets really, really excited and rushes the tempo a bit. It pretty much ensures that music is not going to sound the same way twice. And in addition, if you're performing in a live concert hall, then you have the audience also contributing to the performance. Because there's always that one guy, and you know who it is, that one guy who has a coughing fit right in the middle of a really quiet section of music. These are all elements that were unplanned. They weren't planned by the composer, and generally they weren't planned by the conductor or the musician or anyone even involved in the making of the music. They just happened. And so sometimes composers will seek to introduce intentionally aleatoric elements into the music. A lot of times you'll see pieces where a composer will give the trumpet, say, 4 notes, and will say, each individual player play these 4 notes at whatever tempo you like for the next 10 seconds or so. And so there's no telling how each individual trumpet player is going to play those 4 notes, and that is the aleatoric element because that particular section of the music is never going to sound the same way twice. And there are some pieces where a composer will maybe flip a coin or roll a die or pick a card in order to decide who's going to play next or what note is going to be played next or something like that. And you might be saying, okay, fair enough, these are not planned elements, but they're still organized, aren't they? Because the composer is still inserting them into the piece. That still makes them organized sound, right? Yes, it does. Which brings me to 4 minutes 33 seconds. 4 minutes 33 seconds is a piece by John Cage, and it is literally 4 minutes 33 seconds of no musical sound whatsoever. If there is a performer, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't play anything, he doesn't sing anything. It's just 4 minutes 33 seconds of nothing. Except the whole point behind this piece is that it's not nothing because there are always ambient sounds in the performance area. So the idea is that the sounds of the performance area, whatever the performance area happens to be, will provide the music of the piece for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. So if you're in a concert hall, then you might hear the shuffling of feet, some coughing, the uncomfortable murmuring of an audience who's waiting for the musician to start playing, stuff like that. But let's say that the performance area isn't inside. Let's say that it's outside. Let's say that it's in a park or something. Because then the ambient noises will be much, much different. You'll hear the wind rustling through the trees. You'll hear birds singing. You'll hear maybe some cars rushing past on the road. You'll hear the sounds of nature and the sounds of the surrounding outside area. And that will be a much more interesting performance of the piece. But none of the sounds that you're hearing, none of these intrinsic properties of sound are being organized, except for the overall duration of the piece. And it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, but a lot of musicians will just simply ignore that and see it as arbitrary, and it is pretty much arbitrary. So really, none of the sound is organized at this point, so can we really call it music? Well, some would be very, very quick to say no, but I'm not sure that we can rule it out just yet, especially when you consider the historical perspective of music. Well, music history is very long and very complicated, and music historians are still studying and analyzing it today, but if we were to do the very unwise thing of trying to condense it down to one simple idea, it would be a bunch of people trying to figure out this very question. What is music? So let's gain some historical perspective here, and I think to make things easier, since there is so much music out there, it might be easier to first figure out what isn't music. So first of all, we're cutting that whole 4 minutes 33 seconds crap. That, I mean, come on, that's just sound. It's not music, it's not organized. We're not going to consider it music at all. We're not even going to consider it. Okay, so music is organized sound. Well, what about the music of Schoenberg and Weber, and what about the music of the serialists? Now, serialism is a particular way of composing music where you take the 12 pitches in the chromatic scale and you organize them into a particular order, and they always come in that order, and then you organize this rather complicated matrix around this pitch order, and you compose your piece based solely on that matrix. That does sound pretty organized. What does it end up sounding like? Usually like a bunch of pitches just played at random. Okay, no one wants to listen to that. That's not music either. No, we can't consider that music. It has to be something that people actually listen to as music. I mean, we know music when we hear it, right? So it has to sound like music. It can't just sound like a bunch of random pitches or noise. It has to sound like music. Okay, so what sounds like music? What about popular music? What about stuff like rap or hard rock or something like that? No, rap doesn't have a melody. That can't be considered music. And hard rock, that's usually just screaming, isn't it? That's just noise. That's not music either. Okay, well, what about rock songs and pop songs that actually do sound like music? What about those? No, those just use the same tired chords and melodies over and over again. No, that's not music either. That's not nice to listen to. Let's get really traditional. All right, let's say that anything composed after like 1920, anything composed after that is not music. It's off the table completely. So you're completely eliminating the jazz era. Jazz, there's nothing organized about that. It's just people improvising and playing whatever they want, whatever they feel like. No, it's gotta be more organized than that. Okay, well, what about the music of the Impressionists, the music that really tried to express an emotion? Or what about the music of the late Romantic era, the programmatic music that had all these symbolic elements that tried to literally as possible tell a story? Oh, you mean like Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf, where like the different instruments represented different characters in the story. Like the string section was Peter, the piccolo was the bird, the oboe was the duck, the clarinet was the cat, and that sort of thing? Well, I mean, it's not really pure music, is it? I mean, it's music trying to tell a story or trying to convey something outside of music. I mean, can we really consider that music? So you're saying that any music that tells a story, any music that has an emotion, any music that has a function outside of music, that should not be considered music? Yes, that's it exactly. If we're really going to define music, we need to break it down to its absolute purest form. We need to break it down to the point where it's just music for music's own sake. Music that doesn't have any sort of reference to anything outside of it. Just the pure, simple music. Sounds like you're describing absolute music? Yes, that is in fact the basic definition of absolute music. Music for its own pure sake. Okay, well, let me pose another question then. What is that sake? When you start to look at music history, then you start to realize that every successive era of music has been a reaction to the previous era of music and has either attempted to break music out of whatever box it was being put in before, or attempting to put music back into a box and redefine the boundaries of what music really is. And you start to discover that the music of the Impressionists was a reaction to the overblown, bombastic music of the late Romantic era, and the music of the Romantic era was a reaction to the overly rational and intellectual and non-emotional music of the Classical era. And the music of the Classical era was a reaction to the over-embellished, overly religious music of the Baroque era. And the music of the Baroque era was a reaction to the overly intellectual, anti-religious music of the Renaissance, and the Renaissance was a reaction to the church's stranglehold on music from the polyphony and the Gregorian chants. And we discovered that this question, and in fact this very passionate, heated debate of what constitutes music, and moreover what constitutes good, right, pure music, has been going on for a very long time. And you start to realize that it's really not fair to take anything off the table with regards to what is and isn't music, because when you start to do that, then you have to realize that the traditional music, the music that we think of as the true pure music, at one time was not considered to be good music. Mozart's music was criticized for having too many notes. Beethoven's music was criticized for being too long and too hard on his musicians. And Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which is studied in most music history classes nowadays, when it first came out, it caused a riot. So if we've gotten to the point now where we can consider those things music, then how can we just arbitrarily rule out the serialist music, or jazz, or pop music, or 4 minutes 33 seconds? Which, admittedly, doesn't really help us with our question, does it? Okay. Is anyone interested in a more practical approach? Because the fact of the matter is, music is going to strike every person differently. Every single person, every single individual is going to have their own interpretation of what music is and how we should define it. And this doesn't even get into the complication of music having to pass through a number of different mediums before it gets to its listener. It's not just a matter of one creator in a relationship with one listener. Think about it. A composer writes a piece of music. He puts the notes on the page and he sends it out there and it's a thing in the world. But it's not really music until it's something that you can listen to. And in order for it to be something that you can listen to, somebody has to perform it. And that requires a performer, and in many cases, a number of performers. And each of those performers is going to have their own way of looking at the music, at looking at what the composer wrote. And it might not necessarily be what the composer heard in his head when he wrote it on the page. Add to that if you have a whole bunch of musicians together, they're going to need to be under the direction of a conductor. And that conductor isn't going to be looking at individual parts, he's going to be looking at the music as a whole and how all of these different individual parts fit together. So he's going to have his own interpretation of how the music should be performed and what the composer intended and what he wants out of the music. And add to that you've got all these teachers and studio professors telling these musicians how they should play their instruments or use their voice. You've got all of these different historical contexts, all of these other composers and conductors and musicians who have performed this piece before, who have their own takes on how it should be played. And even adding another complication, you've got recording artists. When you make a recording, somebody has to decide how these sounds are going to mix together, and he's also going to affect the outcome of the music. And so that's why, if you have a completely different team of people working on it, one recording of a piece of music could sound completely different from another recording of that same piece of music. When you study music for a long time like I have, you've slowly come to the realization that music is not as exact as people would have us believe. It's not really an exact science. I mean, yeah, there are so many beats per minute, and yeah, this note is so long and it's exactly that long, and this pitch is exactly this frequency and all that sort of stuff. But even the most anal of composers cannot control every aspect of the music that he writes. Consider dynamics. Let's say you're looking at a piece of music and you have a crescendo from a piano to a forte, or for the musically uninitiated, a very soft volume to a very loud volume. So let's say that you have that. Well, how soft is soft and how loud is loud? There's no chart telling you exactly how soft a piano is or how loud a forte is. So it's going to be different every time you do it. And so how soft are you going to make that piano? How loud are you going to make that forte? How big a contrast are you going to make between them when you gradually get louder with that crescendo? That's all stuff that the musician has to decide for himself, and everyone's going to look at it a little bit differently. Music is very much a series of different interpretations throughout time of what music should be. A certain rhythm in the Baroque era actually means something completely different when you look at it in a different historical and cultural context. There's not nearly as much consistency in music as we would like there to be. It is a little bit more art than science at times. And so if we can't even find exactness with the music itself and who exactly is creating that music, then how can we expect to find a solid, concise definition for it? When you start to consider all of these different perspectives and all of these different musical philosophies and all of these points of view on music, not to mention the fact that philosophies change over time as different experiences come into play, the definition of music becomes quite muddled indeed. Which leaves us with a certain conundrum as far as our original question is concerned. After all of that explanation and information and those different perspectives, we still don't really have a handle on what music is. We still don't really have a definition. And add to that the fact that our perception of music is constantly changing. In fact, you could even argue that every new period of music has brought with it a different definition of what music is. We've been studying music for centuries. We've been trying to find an answer to this very question, and we still don't have it. Well, what if we just look at the dictionary definition? Let's just be really, really literal about this and see what the dictionary has to say. Music. Noun. The art or science of combining vocal or instrumental sounds, or both, to produce beauty of form, harmony, and expression of emotion. Well, that sounds pretty good, except for that one pesky word, beauty. Beauty? That's a pretty subjective term for a dictionary definition, isn't it? I mean, who are we to decide what constitutes beauty? Who are we to decide what makes beautiful music? Well, I mean, I have a bachelor's degree in it, but that's beside the point. Our perceptions of beauty are going to be different. I mean, let's take Wagner, for example. Now, Wagner fans of Wagner's operas are hardcore. I mean, you pretty much have to be to go see an opera that literally takes 4 nights to view in its entirety. But Wagner fans are absolutely diehard. And yet there are still people who cannot stand Wagner's music, who don't find it beautiful. And that doesn't even get into the issue of popular music, of hard rock, rap, country, Rebecca Black's Friday. I mean, if we don't find these things beautiful, can we really call them music? In the end, all we can do is try to find an explanation for it as best we can. Like I said in the beginning, we know it when we hear it. And yet those of us who have chosen music as a career have basically made a life out of trying to find a definition for this thing that is just full of contradictions. It is both tangible and intangible. It's both logical and emotional. It's both psychological and physiological. It is both planned and aleatoric. It is both personal and communal. It is both artistic and banal. It is both ancient and yet continuously new. It is so ubiquitous and it encompasses so much of the human experience and of our everyday lives that it is impossible to try to pin it down and define it in the course of one video, especially given the fact that we've been doing this for centuries. But hell, we're gonna try anyway, over the course of several videos. But a question that you might be asking yourself right now if you're thinking about clicking that subscribe button is, why should we care? I mean, why can't we just sit back and enjoy music? What difference does it make whether we find a definition for it? You said it yourself. We know it when we hear it. So why do we have to go to all this trouble, and why can't we just enjoy music? Music is one of the most inescapable and ubiquitous aspects of the human existence. It's everywhere. It's in cars, it's on the street, it's in department stores, it's in our homes, it's in our schools, it's in our churches. It is absolutely everywhere. You cannot get away from it. Music has the power to change the way that we feel, think, and act. It has the power to affect us physically, mentally, and emotionally. It is so firmly integrated into our history and culture that you can't talk about one without talking about the other. It gives us incredible insight into the human experience and is one of the most universal ways of telling a story. Something with so much power and so much presence in our lives just demands to be looked at and explored. Why should we care? I think the better question is, why wouldn't we? See you next time. Thanks for watching this first video on Nutter as well. If you like what you see and would like to see more, then please click that subscribe button and be sure to like this video on your way out. Videos on this channel are going to be pretty infrequent because they are going to take a while to write and make and all that sort of thing, so I'm not going to be posting videos fairly often on here. However, if you would like to get a little bit more music teaching in your daily life, then I encourage you to follow the Tumblr that is also paired with this YouTube channel, yourmusicquestions.tumblr.com. There is a link in the description. You can ask any question about music and I will try to answer it in as timely a manner as I possibly can. Please don't ask questions that you can just as easily search on Google or Wikipedia. Ask questions that require a little bit of thought and maybe some opinion-based philosophy, and I will do my best to answer them, and if I find a really, really good question in there, it might make its way into a YouTube video. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye now. And I realize I'm totally ripping off Vsauce with that entrance and exit, but whatever.